Welcome back to the channel. We're back with our Commander deck profile with Miles Morales. For 1 in the green, you get a 1-2, where when Miles enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. Doesn't necessarily have to be creatures you control, but then you can also pay 3, a red, green, and a white to transform him into the Ultimate Spider-Man. He becomes a forgery at first strike and haste, so if you do transform him this turn, he is still able to attack. You pay 2 mana, put a +1/+1 counter on this card, gain hexproof, and become colorless until end of turn. Whenever you attack, double the number of each kind of counter on each spider and each legendary creature you control. There are definitely more legendary creatures than there are spiders in this game, so we're going to tend to go with the legendary creature side of that in order to make sure that our legendary creatures can get super strong to swing in on our opponent for a lot of damage there. And just some +1/+1 counter synergies that we have in this deck, because there's a lot of them in the game, especially when you're running green. But that's the general overview of the deck. Let's get into it card by card. Starting off, we have Adamantium Bonding Tank, aka the Ozolith, but I mean, you're already in Marvel. Let's stay in Marvel. Whenever a creature leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put them onto Adamantium Tank, and then later at the start of combat on a turn, you can move those counters onto a creature, eventually doubling them with the Ultimate Spider-Man, which also something to note, you don't necessarily have to attack with the Ultimate Spider-Man. You could just attack with one of your other creatures. Potentially the one you put all those +1/+1 counters on. Maybe some shield counters, maybe some charge counters. But we'll get into that as we get further into the video. Lightning Grease, to give our other creatures haste, we want to make sure that they can attack the turn they come down. This way you can get the Ultimate Spider-Man's doubling ability off, because normally a forgery isn't enough to be swinging in with. I mean, if you get to pay the extra 2, but if you're already having the pay the 6, you tend not to have like 8 mana. You are in green, so you do have quite a bit of mana, but I don't know if it's really enough to be able to like swing it with him the turn he comes down. Ozolith the Shattered Spire, whenever you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, put that mana +1. You also pay some extra mana to either cycle it or put some counters onto a creature. Both are good abilities there. This way, when we use the camouflage ability, we get the extra counter onto the Ultimate Spider-Man, or we get some extra counters on those counters that we're getting. Sarah Farron, first legendary creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 less to cast. Like I said, we're trying to run this mostly with legendary creature synergies, so this will help us get them for even cheaper, get them with that +1/+1 counter sooner, and then allow them to swing in. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 2 or more other legendary creatures, transform her into Crystallized Sarah. Legendary creatures you control get +2/+2, and the other ability of cost reduction does stay around, so that's nice there as well. And also that does allow them to swing in a little bit easier. Swiftfoot Boots for that haste as well, same thing with Lightning Grease. Sometimes it also allows us to get that hex proof onto Ultimate Spider-Man without having to use his camouflage ability. Earth Crystal, another counter doubler in order to make sure we're having as many counters on our creatures here as possible, because Ultimate Spider-Man double the number of each kind of counter on your legendary creatures. So say something had 1 counter, you're putting another counter on it, but now you're putting 2 instead. Or if you did the Ozolith, you're putting 2 and now you're putting 4. Great Henge, spell cost X less cast for X's greatest power among creatures you control. With all the counters we're putting on our creatures, we're going to tend to have something with 7 power toughness, so it tends to just cost the 2 mana. You can pay 2 mana, gain 2 life. Sorry, you get 2 mana, gain 2 life, and whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card, allowing us to start off those +1/+1 counters on our creatures to make it even easier to double them. And then the Sariema. Since we have so many legendary creatures we want as deck, we may as well run a little bit of search power here for them. We're also going to tend to have enough ways to crew it, so we're going to give our stuff with the legendary status indestructible as well, to make sure that they can swing in without worry about being destroyed. Speaking about being able to swing in, we have Abzan Falconer to make sure that those creatures also get flying, so that they could actually deal the damage. Anim Pakal, a legendary creature that we like to see those +1/+1 counters on, because whenever you attack with 1 or more creatures, you get X11 gnomes, where X is the number of counters on this card. So you start off with the 1, double that with Ultimate Spider-Man, get some extras on there, keep on going and going until you get more and more gnomes. Anti-Venom, Horrifying Healer. This one we did a whole deck profile on. Probably going to be one of the most popular commanders in the set. But already gets a lot of counters on itself in its own way. You are in 3 colors, and this does cost 5 mono white. So that is a bit of a problem with this deck, is that you may not have the mana to cast it. But when you do, doubling the number of counters on something that already has like 20 counters on it potentially, that's a lot of damage. Aragorn, Hornburg Hero, 4 mana for 4/4. Attacking creatures you control have First Strike and Renown 1. Also, a legendary creature. Allows us to get those +1/+1 counters on our creatures. Allows us to have First Strike, allowing us to swing in a little bit easier without to worry about them getting destroyed. And then whenever another non-token creature you control deals combat damage to a player, double number of +1/+1 counters on it. Between Abs and Falconer and some ways that we have to give our creatures haste, our creatures with the +1/+1 counters are going to be dealing plenty of damage, so doubling it with Spider-Man, then doubling it again with Aragorn, both really good abilities for this deck. Arwen, Weaver of Hope. Sticking with the Lord of the Rings theme, each creature you control enters the battlefield number of +1/+1 counters equal to Arwen's toughness. We only start off with 1, but if we keep getting counters onto Arwen, that keeps going up. Birds of Paradise for some additional mana. Bright Palm, Soul Awakener, way to get some +1/+1 counters on our creatures, but also whenever this creature attacks, double the number of +1/+1 counters on target creature, potentially itself, potentially one of your other things. It does have to be this creature attacking, so that is the other side of it, but thankfully the backup does also give that ability to another creature, so maybe if you have like an Anti-Venom on the battlefield that you want to swing in with, you can give that the way to double its own counters. So starts off with, let's just say for example, has 5 counters. You double it with Bright Palm, that goes up to 10, double it again with Ultimate Spider-Man, you're already at those 20 counters that we were talking about earlier. Bristly Bill, Spine Sower, we're trying double counters. Let's put some counters on things because we're going to be playing lands, and double them again if we have the 5 mana to do it, which we're in green, we're going to tend to. Dust Shell Crawler, we want to make sure our creatures with the +1/+1 counters can't just be blocked by creatures that are 1/1s. Let's give them ways to have them have trample so that they can actually deal some damage. Alana and Elena, partners. First Strike, Reach, at the beginning of combat, your turn, put X +1/+1 counters on another target creature you control, where X is this creature's power. That creature gains haste until end of turn. If we double number counters on this, that'll also put a lot of counters on the other creature. Well, at the beginning of combat, so this happens, and then you get the Spider-Man's ability. So if we double this like last turn, so I'm referencing. Hamza, Guardian Arsham, another legendary creature that really likes those +1/+1 counters. Doesn't necessarily care about how many +1/+1 counters you have on each creature, but if we have ways to get a +1/+1 counter on all of our creatures, we're basically just paying the red, the green, and the white. We're no longer having to worry about the colorless casting cost of our spells. Kami the Whisper Hopes, another way to get some additional counters on our creatures, along with a lot of mana, which we may need for this deck. Kodama the West Tree, like we said with Dust Shell Crawler, we want to make sure our modified creatures have a way to do actual damage and not just get blocked by 1/1s and not deal any damage. So we have this here, and also gets us a little bit of ramp while we're at it. Kutziel, Malamet Exemplar, whenever one or more creatures you control with power greater than space power deal combat damage, aka one of those creatures that just trampled over with those +1/+1 counters, draw a card. So we get plenty of draw power there, along with Reki, who also gives us draw power for our legendary creatures. Rishkar, Pima Renegade, also legendary creature, giving us those +1/+1 counters on our creatures, giving us a starting point to double, and also just a little bit of extra mana while we're at it. Shalai and Halar, Flying Vigilance, whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature, deal that much damage to target opponent. So say if we are doubling those 20 counters on Venom up to 40, and we double again to 80, we already destroyed one opponent with 60 damage, even if they had enough to activate Aetherflux Reservoir. Sovereign Akaneka How, 4 mana for a 3/4. Whenever it attacks, for each creature you control with power greater than space power, put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to the difference. So basically, if we start with 1/1, or let's go back to our Anti-Venom example. Say if it had those 20 counters on it, it's now the 25/25, so we get the difference between its power and toughness is 20. So we're getting those 20 extra counters onto it. You could also stack this versus the way you want to activate Spider-Man's ability in terms of like getting this first and then doubling. So you go up to 40 and then you go up to 80. It's a big jump. And then Spider-Man, Miles Morales, Vigilance, Trample. Enters or attacks, put +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Good way to make sure we get those counters onto our creatures in the first place to have something to double. Tifa, Martial Artist. Unless it's some extra combat, so we have some big creatures, we want to make sure we deal some damage. And normally this will just be, she'll just be 7 power and toughness on her own. Toski, Bearer Secrets, just a really good legendary creature that we like to swing in with to get some draw power. Twitching Doll for some extra mana, along with a lot of spiders, because we do have some benefits with spiders. And Yoshimaru, Ever Faithful, another legendary creature that really benefits off those +1/+1 counters. In theory, you could put Aerith in here, like for some additional like +1/+1 counter legendary creature synergies, but we just didn't have enough life gain in here. Enchantments, we have Annie joins up, deal 5 damage, aka removing a creature, and then whenever an ability of a creature happens, it happens additional time, aka double the number of +1/+1 counters onto Anti-Venom, and then double that again. So once again, we're at 20 example. We'll double it with Spider-Man. Going up to 40. They'll double it again, putting up to 80. And then we have a How, double it again, putting us up to 160 counters. And then they block it with a 1/1 because it doesn't have trample. Branching Evolution, whenever one or more +1/+1 counters will be put on a creature you control, put twice that many instead. We like to put a lot of +1/+1 counters on things. Why not put even more? Speaking of which, Hardened Scales does something similar, but only one additional one. Innkeeper Sounds allows us a starting point for those +1/+1 counters, along with a little bit of protection with the ward, along with another way to double. Rhythm of the Wild, give our creatures that +1/+1 counter when they enter. Also can't be countered, allowing us to avoid those blue players. Sphere Grid, giving our creatures trample and reach with the +1/+1 counters, allowing some extra draw power as well, right? Nope, just put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. I was thinking something else. But yeah, we like to see it. We could deal damage, we could protect. We like both those things. Terra Symbiosis. We can potentially deck ourselves out. If, for example, you ordered Anti-Venom's ability differently, and like you put those 20 counters on it, you could potentially draw 20 cards with that. I like those odds. And then Uncivil Unrest, non-token creatures control enter with those +1/+1 counters. If your creature with a +1/+1 counter would deal damage to a permanent or player, double that damage instead. Double it and give it to the same player? I like it. And for the second half of our deck, we have Instance with Arachnogenesis, giving us plenty of spiders here to get some +1/+1 counters on. Beast Within for some removal, Chaos Warp for some removal, Generous Gift for some removal, Heroic Invention for some protection, Inspiring Call for some protection, along with some +1/+1 counters, Path to Exile for some removal, Protection Magic. We could get some shield counters on our things, because we don't necessarily just care about +1/+1 counters. Shield counters count as well. Silk Guard for some protection, Spectacular Tactics, some +1/+1 counters along with Hexproof on our creatures, along with some removal, Stroke Midnight for some removal, Source Splashes for some removal, and then Unbreakable Formation for some protection. As always, we'll scroll through the lands at the end. Austere Command, potentially removing all of our opponent's tokens and enchantments and artifacts, while removing none of our stuff, because all of our stuff's going to be 4 or greater. Blasphemous Act, tends to be the point where our stuff is strong enough to survive 13. So, we'll remove all our opponent's stuff, none of ours. Cultivate, because we need the ramp in this deck. Damning Verdict for board wipe, destroy all creatures with no counters on them, aka our opponent's stuff, none of ours. Farseek for some ramp, Kodamas Reach for some ramp. Last March of the Ents, really fun card in this deck. We have a lot of creatures, 23 in total in this deck. So if we have a way to, get Anti-Venom up to 160 power, we could draw 160 cards and deck ourselves out. We love it. Nature's Law for some ramp, and then put all the creatures into our hand while we're at it. Rishkar's Expertise, once again, draw 160 cards, deck yourself out, and put something with mana value 5 or less onto the battlefield. 3 Visits for some ramp. Urza's Ruinous Blast. Most of our stuff is legendary, and our opponent's stuff tends not to be. So we exile it, getting around indestructible while we're at it, getting rid of our soul rings as well, but We don't even have Soul Ring in this deck, so we don't have to worry about it. And then Vandal Blast for a board wipe of those artifacts. But that's the deck there. If you guys liked the video, make sure you like the video. If you want to see more like this, subscribe so you can stay tuned for future videos. But thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of the day.